Hi there, Titans, and welcome back to another Titan Academy video. Today we'll be talking about the AutoFit container in Titan Web. We'll talk about when and why to use an AutoFit container. We'll show you how to align the elements inside of your AutoFit container, create some spacing between those elements, as well as remove the border of your AutoFit container. We'll also show you how you can swap positions of the elements in your container or move the items around. We will also show you the direction that you can set your elements to appear inside of your AutoFit container. And finally, we'll show you how you can auto-resize the height of your AutoFit container and why that can be very important. So in order to understand why and when to use the AutoFit container, I'm going to go ahead and add an element here. So we'll just add a random shape to our container. And you can see when I add that shape, it snaps into a particular position. And what the AutoFit container does for me, or the first thing that it does for me, is creates a structure for my elements to sit nicely one on top of the other. The next thing the AutoFit container does is it helps me with different resizing issues that might come up on my form. So I'm going to demonstrate a couple of those things so that you can understand what we're talking about here. I've already set up a get here that is running on load and is going to populate my title with a contact description. Now that contact description is very long, and if that description was sitting, if this field or if these fields were sitting outside of a container, the dynamic content that came here would run over the other fields. Let's see what happens when we preview this now that it's sitting inside an AutoFit container. So as you can see, I get my dynamic content and it simply pushes down the rest of my elements, and instead of running them over, it resizes everything really nicely. I've also set up an on-click action for my title, and that action is just hiding my text field here. So in a moment, I'm going to click on this title right here, and I'm going to hide this text field, and I want you to pay attention to what will happen to the other elements underneath my text field. Once I click this, you can see that my text field is hidden, and instead of there being an empty gap where the text field was, my elements have jumped up to take the position of my text field. And so when I hide or show elements, we also see a nice resizing of the element itself. The final reason to use an AutoFit container is when I work with different device types, I want to make sure that my elements resize nicely when I create the device. So for example, if I look at mobile small, and I'll do manual layout, and you can see that my elements have ordered themselves in a really nice way. Because of the AutoFit container, the system knows exactly where to put each element so that they'll sit nicely on my initial configuration. All right. The next thing we want to talk about is aligning elements within our AutoFit container. So imagine that I want to move this button to the center. All I would need to do is click on my alignment icon and align center, and my button will align center within the AutoFit container. If I try to move this element back and forth like this, that will not work. So if I want to align it, I need to rely on my alignment tool, or I can also add margin to the button to push it to a specific location. We can also talk about spacing between our elements. As you can see, our elements are sitting one on top of another, and they're pretty close to one another. If we want to add some spacing, we can head over to Styling, Spacing, and add some pixels of spacing. Let's do 20, and now we can see that we have a little bit more breathing room between our elements. The next important thing is the border of the AutoFit container. We can see that by default, our AutoFit container has this border, and unlike the form element, if I preview this, I actually see this border in the UI. And so if I want to remove that border or style that border, I can of course change the color of the border. And so one way would be to just simply change the color to white or to whatever your background is, and then you would not see the border anymore. And the other way that you can accomplish this, perhaps you don't have a white background, and I'll just demonstrate this by making my border a different color. I can also head to Styling, Border, and give my border a weight of 0, and then I will no longer see a border when I preview this. As you can see, no border here. All right. The next thing is moving items or swapping position of items in my AutoFit container. If I want to swap positions, I have these handy arrows that can help me move the element exactly where I would like to make sure that these are sitting in the appropriate order. Now, as you can see, my order currently is all vertical, but if I want, I can also swap my AutoFit container to be horizontal. And so as you can see, and I need to make this element a bit smaller Let's just change the size here so that we can see the rest of our elements. We'll make this a width of 20 or a bit bigger. Okay, and now I can see all of my elements arranged horizontally or vertically. And by the way, just so that we can see this, and I'll swap the location here so that it will be a little bit more clear. All of the resizing that we showed earlier will work horizontally the same way that it worked vertically. So when I click on this, my elements resize nicely. The last thing I want to discuss is the auto resizing of the container itself. We saw how all the elements inside the AutoFit container resize nicely. But what happens if I hide multiple elements inside my container? What will happen to the actual container itself? So in order to demonstrate this, I'm actually going to put back our border, and I'm going to add a button. And my button is just simply going to hide a couple of elements. I'm just going to hide the shape, the text field, and let's say also the text. Okay, so I'm only going to leave one element in there, my button, and let's say hide elements. And I'm also going to turn off my get to make sure that we can see everything clearly. Okay, excellent. So again, I'm going to hide a bunch of elements, and let's take a look what happens to our container. So when I hide my elements, you can see that my container still has a lot of height. This might affect other elements that are further down on my canvas in my project. And so in order for my container to resize height, I'm going to head over to Styling, Size, Advanced, and Auto Resize Height on the AutoFit container itself. And that will let the height of my container resize based on the content. So now if I come and preview this and I hide elements, you can see that the AutoFit container has resized to fit snugly on that button because that is the only element left inside. This is an extremely important element to be using, and I hope that you will all use it well. Thanks.